You're watching PowerNation.
Welcome to PowerNation Builds. Now, if you're anything like me and like old school hot rods, then I know just the place that you can find a sweet treat. Here's Detroit Muscle.
Over the years, the clean lines of the 49 Ford inspired customizers and triggered a new ongoing trend of sheet metal manipulation. It put Ford on the road to post-war prosperity. Well, here's what's in our future some 65 plus years later. It's a two-door 49 sedan that we picked up for a heck of a deal. And it runs and stops most of the time. Here's what happened. The previous owner prepped it, got it in primer, and then decided to dump his plans for restoration. So he decided to let it go.
We jumped on board to offer this iconic old Ford a makeover. Now this thing isn't going to be like our normal build. We're going to get a little bit creative and build us a custom ride.
You old hot riders might remember the fuel we're going for, so grease up your pompadour and grab your best gal, because Project Banana Split is officially underway, headed to a drive-in near you really soon.
Our first modification is a pretty serious undertaking. We're going to be doing a suicide door conversion. Now people have been doing this modification for years on all type of vehicles for one reason and one reason only. It's just plain cool.
Most of these panels are pretty easy to remove. You just unscrew a few fasteners and you're in business. There's no need to keep this old latch around. We won't be using it on the front side of the door or the spider webs either.
All right, now we're going to set this thing into place. Kind of figure out exactly where we want it, keeping those inside the quarter. I'll use our body saw to cut out the sections of the door jamb where the new hinges are going to go. Well, all right guys, we got our holes cut. Now we have to do a little bit more trimming here of the inner structure of the door post. It's no big deal, but what we're trying to do is make room for this bar. Then we'll slide the door hinges in and tack them into place. And once we get the door opening and closing, we'll come back and brace all this stuff up.
The primer has to be ground off the hinges so they can be tacked in. Then we'll tack the bottom hinge just a little bit, but we still want to be able to move the top for replacement.
Now we're only leveling up one axis of our door hinges, and there's a reason why. It's because this door is so thick, we had to lay this upper hinge back just a bit. When I put this thing up there, you can see we're probably about 3/4 of an inch or so in. No big deal. It's like I mentioned earlier, sometimes you just got to do what you got to do to get what you got to get. All right guys, we're ready to install the pockets that are going to hold the door in place. Now with these things, they generally just kind of bolt up here and it's got a plate that goes to the back. A little tip for you is to put in some aluminum shims in between this pocket and that hinge, because just in case you needed to move the door in, you can take these shims out. Without them, once that thing's welded up, there's really no adjustment.
With the door closed, we can mark it where we'll have to cut for the pockets to go in. With a quick check, we can tell if it's going to work or not, and then prep it for welding. When you shut the door to weld it, make sure to check the door gap so that it fits well before you burn it in. Then it's time to weld. Now that we're certain that the pockets are well placed, it's time for some reinforcement to keep them well placed. This will also prevent the door from flexing under its own weight. After all, it wasn't originally designed to bear that load from this side. When Now you got an idea of what it takes to convert your conventional door to a sexy suicide door. Not much money in materials, less than $300, but a whole lot of patience and hard work.
Coming up, there is still plenty of work to be done. Custom work at that on this blue oval transformation.
Well, all right, guys, we're continuing the customization of our old Ford. The next thing we're going to do, we're going to French the antenna. Now, originally, our antenna was located on the front fender, but we're going to move it back here to the quarter panel. We'll start with a pilot hole from an 1/8" drill bit, and then we'll bust out a hole saw and gradually work it into a more vertical position as the cut is made. We'll use a carbide bit to shape the fitment of the tube for what we're going for, and then prep it for tacking. A cutting wheel is what we'll use to lob off the extra tube at the top. And then we'll grind off the extra material down flat with the panel. With it flush, we can burn the tube all the way around. A little dressing up will finish it and make it look nice on our quarter panel. Well, it's that simple, and it really doesn't take all that long to make this conversion. Now, we do have to address the drain, but that's simple. Drill a hole in the trunk floor and run a hose. You guys might give it a shot.
Since the old days, even before my time, hot rodders have been customizing and Frenching headlights with all kinds of treatments to make a smoother look. Here's what we got in store.
Our plan is to install a set of headlight bezels out of a 55 ohms. Now, this is a very popular conversion with the lead sled guys. Now, installing this thing, well, it all depends on what you're trying to put it into. Could be simple or could be quite the task.
One way to go is go ahead and install the bezel and build the body out to it, creating a bug-eyed look. However, we think it'll look a lot better if we recess this bucket so that the light is flush with the body here. To make that happen, we're going to take this metal strip we just cut, actually make a ring to go around the bucket so we can move it further in. So I'm going to take this thing first and make a 90-degree bend before we move over to the shrinker. The metal shrinker takes a little bit of pressure at a time in small sections. You move down the length of the metal to create a curve as you go.
After you get tired of smashing and shrinking, you got to do it a little bit more, and then you have you a ring a lot like this one. You just simply put it on top of the bucket. And you see here we've got to trim this piece off because it's in the way of letting it sit down nice and flush. A little grinding is in order to clean up the welds, and then we can move on. With our ring attached to our bucket, you can see what we were trying to accomplish. Now it looks like we could build a tab similar to this one on the stock fender and weld it to our ring, and that'll keep the orientation of the headlight in the exact location we need it and still allowing us to adjust it if need be. We have to build up the top of the fender out just a little bit to meet the bezel, so some tape will protect it from any sparks. I'll use a straight edge to figure out where the new metal needs to go to make the fender meet the bezel. Then a cardboard template can be whittled up for the piece that goes in here. I'll replicate the template onto some 18 gauge steel and cut it out. Then we can begin shaping it to make the seamless transition to the bezel. Once it's good to go, I'll grind down the primer so that we can weld it in place. I need to make a relief cut on the top to help it fit better, and then I'll weld it back together once the pieces are better attached. Once we dressed up the welds, well, we'll put our new bezel in place. And dang! Originally, this old Ford had a piece of trim that run all the way down the middle of the hood. Now we're wanting to shave that thing off, fill this in, and take a 1/4 inch piece of solid stock and weld it all the way down the middle from the front to the back. You want to position the strip, then make a tack. Work your way down, tacking both sides evenly so the welds don't pull the strip over. Now we can burn the whole thing in, moving around frequently so we don't warp up the hood by generating too much heat in one place. With the center of the hood all ground down, we're ready to start doing the peaking. And to do that, we're going to use a piece of 1/4-inch solid stock that we picked up from a hardware store. Now, if you slide the rod back just a bit instead of bringing it all the way to the edge of the hood, this will allow you to kind of grind it down a bit after the weld is done to have a nice flowing taper. There we go. Now, just having that one tack there on the end will allow you to be able to slide and adjust this rod however you need it to be, have it perfectly lined up at your peak.
Now the rest of it can be welded. Just like on the strips, you want not to spend very much time on one spot, so you don't warp the hood.
Now with the grinding rock roughing it all in, we're going to come back and use this blending disc to smooth it all out.
Up next, Project Banana Split is starting to look like one heck of a sweet hot rod.
Okay, so much for the decorative details. Now it's time to give this 49 Ford some proper power and performance.
We just removed our factory flathead V8, making way for something new. Kinda. We're sticking with that tradition that started back in '32.
It's a good idea to keep a couple fingers crossed while you clean the block. That's because flatties were notorious for overheating, which led to nasty cracks. In fact, this one had a couple of small cracks that required some machine shop surgery before they could freshen it up.
Back home, they filled the block with new aftermarket parts while keeping everything old school, like the Edelbrock heads in one of their vintage tri-power intakes. On the engine dyno, with 26 degrees of timing, the old girl made 159 horsepower and 253 foot-pounds of torque. That's a far cry from the 100 horsepower of our stock 239 flatty.
And the best part is, they're going to let us put it to good use powering up our 49 Ford.
Well, we got our car all sealed up and we're ready to start applying some color. The first thing we're going to do is spray on some of this milk white that we got from Summit Racing, and then we're going to spray on some yellow, but that's going on the sides. Well, our base coat is plenty dry enough so that we can do some taping. This old Ford, it's going to get a pretty simple two-tone. I'm going to break it right here on this factory body line. It's that simple. Well, we're ready to start mixing up some yellow. Summit offers this awesome color called Go Banana, but it's a little bit too intense for what we're looking for. We're wanting something a little bit more like banana pudding, if you will. Now what our plan is to take some of this yellow, mix it with some white over here, and then we'll have us that awesome color.
After 3 coats of base, we're ready to unmask it and reveal the two-tone.
All right, guys, we've got our yellow sprayed on, our white sprayed on, the car unmasked, and we're ready to spray on some clear. This 2-stage paint system is a far cry from the stoving enamel paint methods that were common in the year the Ford was manufactured, which was a sprayed-on coating that had to be cured at 250 degrees Fahrenheit. Manufacturers were still experimenting with base coat clear coat systems well into the 70s.
With the body sprayed and pulled out, the last bit of wet sanding will prep the rest of the panels for their trip to the spray booth. The doors, fenders, hood, and deck lid.
We've pretty much got all the sheet metal bolted to the front side of our Ford. Now we're ready to move on to the bright work. Now we dropped off all our chrome at Advanced Plating to have it redone, and them boys knocked it out of the park like they always do. This grill was originally riveted together, but we're light years from a factory restoration, and these bolts will do the job just fine and dandy. We'll use some nylon locking nuts and flat washers to keep everything in place.
With the center section assembled, it's easier to put the rest of the grill together on the car itself. You can definitely see how designs of this era were heavily inspired by aviation aesthetics. With it all bolted up, we've got ourselves a nice big shiny grill on our hot rod Ford. Our old hot rod has come a long way from when we first puttered it into the shop. From its humble, rusty primer gray origins to an attention-grabbing yellow street machine with oceans of chrome and lots of classy custom mods to make it our own. It's a true vision of the kind of hot rods that the first speed demons were modding up in the early days of the hobby.
Finally, from the inside out, our flathead Ford gets fired up for a real hot rod show.
We hung the now yellow-colored sheet metal back on our 49 Ford last time and bolted on the chrome-plated shiny stuff. After giving the wheels some red paint and retro hubcaps, the exterior of our Project Banana Split is looking far out and fab, man. Our Ford's retro red interior is coming to life thanks to the guys at Hudson Rod and Customs. Homer and Mike are laying down a piece of custom carpet we got from rockauto.com. This will pave the way for the rest of our inside job. The rest of the interior of our 49 Ford comes together equally fast, including a simple package tray, sail panels, and rear side panels. We've been dying to use this old car to try out a hot rod trick that always gets eye-grabbing attention. I mean, anybody can stand out in a crowd of cars with this kind of firepower. Well, today we're going to get a little wild and turn this Ford into a flamethrower. The way it works is you hit the switch inside the car and the 12-volt spark, instead of going to the engine, goes to that module. It pushes unburned fuel through the exhaust, and when it hits this, you got flames.
So the first step is to install the bungs into the tailpipes. We're going to measure it out, make a mark, and drill our holes.
Like we said, anywhere from 8 to 10 inches is the sweet spot for mounting those plugs. We'll drill a pilot hole to get things started, then come in with the big boy to make room for that bung. A little filing will clean up the burrs.
The next thing we're going to do is weld in this nut or the little bung that holds the spark plug.
Well, I guess I'll go grab the modules.
I think I got the wrong end of the stick on this deal. Overhead welding is always fun.
Not too much to be said here, just make sure you seat it well, but don't get it too hot and mess up the threads.
Next, we'll mount the modules. These little things are really cool because they act like a purpose-built coil that fires those spark plugs and makes the cool stuff happen. The kit comes with some self-tappers, but since we're going into the frame, we'll drill and use some machine screws. Then run those wires. We've got our wires ran inside the cab that come from our ignition modules, and they're going to connect right here on this middle post of the switch. Now we've got to make 2 more circuit connections. That's going to interrupt our signal that actually lets our engine run.
So we'll get our coil hooked up to that switch and then install the switch itself. Well, the old banana's ready to split, so to speak.
Certainly not as peppy as that GTO, but it's cool in its own right, you know?
Like they said, it might not run with the pavement pounders of the muscle era, but this yellow machine would have been one bad mama jama during the dawn of the hot rod era.
And since it's got a pile of custom mods thrown at it to improve the looks and fun factor, we think that the true old school hot rodders would be proud.
It definitely doesn't drive like no sports car, but I bet this one's gonna stick out a lot better than some of those sports cars do.
Indeed it will. Yeah, you won't see yourself coming down the road now. Overall, we're going to call this build a success. Fonzie would probably drive it anyway. And James Dean would too. Well, the old girl runs good, she rides good, stops good. Got a couple of crazy passengers, I'm afraid. She really looks good. The old banana split is finally finished. And you know what? She makes fire. I got marshmallows. Time for a farewell party.
We're gonna have fun about it, good thing you know me.
That's kind. I don't know if I'd eat that.
Project Banana Split is a sweet custom hot rod that redefines custom cool. And remember, you can always watch our other projects right here on PowerNation Builds.